The gauge said I had 1,100 gallons of diesel behind me, and the road said I had maybe 4 minutes before the mountain decided what to do with all of it. I remember looking at both those facts at the same time. The way you look at two instruments that disagree, sitting in the cab of a tanker that weighed more than most houses. Watching the yellow Avalanche gates swing shut across Highway 91 like the jaws of something patient. The wipers were still going, dragging the wet snow off the glass in slow arcs. And between each arc, the gates got a little more closed. And I kept expecting them to stop, the way you expect a door to catch before it slams. They didn't stop. Nobody was standing at the gate arm. That was the first wrong thing. And it was a bigger wrong thing than it sounds. So let me tell you why. In 18 years of hauling fuel up into the Colorado high country, I had never once seen those gates close without a CDOT truck parked beside them, and a man in an orange coat with a paddle and a clipboard and a look on his face, like the mountain owed him money. Those gates are theater as much as safety. A person closes them. A person stands there and turns you around and tells you the pass is shut for control work. And you grumble and you turn around, and the whole thing is human from start to finish. But these gates just came down on their own, slow and mechanical, the hydraulics groaning against the cold. And a little amber strobe on top started turning and throwing light across snow that had already gone the flat, dead gray it gets right before a storm stops, pretending to be weather and starts being an event. My radio was full of a sound I didn't have a word for. Not static. Static has a shape to it, a hiss you can set your ear against and ignore. This was people. People talking over each other on a channel that was supposed to be dead at that hour of a Friday. All of them saying more or less the same thing in a dozen different voices. And none of it resolved into sense. Until one voice cut clean through the rest. A man's voice, low and worn thin. And it said, "Do not open the doors. Whatever you do, do not open the resort doors." Then it was gone back under the crowd of voices, like a head going underwater. I want to stop here for just a second, before it gets bad, and say thank you. Thank you to everyone who keeps coming back to sit with these stories. And if this is your first night here, welcome, pull the blanket up. If this kind of slow, cold, true-feeling survival story is your sort of thing, stay with the channel and leave a comment when something gets under your skin. It genuinely keeps this going. Now let me get back to that gate. And the thing I did next, which I've had a long time to regret, I opened my door. Not the resort's, mine. I stepped down out of the cab because that's what you do. When a system fails, you get eyes on it. You find the human who screwed up. You fix it, or you root around it. That's the whole shape of my working life, right there, in one bad instinct. My name is Wes Corrigan. I was 51 that winter. A fuel hauler for a distributor out of Leadville. 29 years married and 11 years widowed. And I had spent my entire adult life believing that machines break in ways men can understand. Believing that a gate is a gate, a pump is a pump, a mountain is a mountain. And that everything on it obeys pressure and temperature and the honest arithmetic of weight. That belief is the reason I'm telling you this instead of somebody smarter. Somebody smarter would have stayed in the cab. The cold hit me like a hand pressed flat against my whole body at once. 12 degrees on the dash reading, probably 8 or 9 down where the wind was funneling through the cut in the rock. And the snow had that dry squeak underfoot that means it's too cold to pack. Too cold to make a snowball. Too cold to be anything but a fine, stinging powder that finds the gap between your collar and your neck within about 4 seconds. I zipped my coat the rest of the way with a hand that had already gone clumsy, and I walked up toward the gate arm. Boots crunching, breath tearing away sideways in the wind before it could even fog. The gate arm was down hard. The hydraulic ram was fully extended, locked, And when I put my glove on it and pushed, not hoping, just checking, the way you jiggle a doorknob you already know is locked, it didn't give a hair. Solid as the rock it was bolted to. Beyond it, the road climbed away from me, up and to the right, into a series of switchbacks I couldn't see the top of. Up another 2 miles to Halverson Basin. To the Timberline Reach Resort, where a night shift maintenance manager named Dellery was supposed to be waiting for me with a signature and a mug of coffee gone lukewarm and the code to the fuel farm gate. That was the whole job. That was supposed to be the whole night. Behind me, back down the valley the way I'd come, I could still see the last gray smear of daylight sitting on the far ridges, the sun already down, but the sky not yet given up. Ahead of me, up the road, there was already no daylight at all, just full dark come early, the way it does when you're on the shadowed side of a big peak in February. And the resort's lights, high up on the shoulder of the mountain, small and yellow and warm-looking. And the way those lights flickered wasn't right. Lights don't flicker like that from a bad bulb or a loose breaker. A bad bulb hums and dies. This was a flicker with rhythm to it, a stutter on, off, on. And I stood there in the wind long enough to understand what I was looking at. The lights weren't failing. Something kept passing in front of them. A lot of somethings, moving between me and the windows, throwing shadows. I climbed back in the cab, and I did it faster than I'd climbed out. The cab was warm, and the cab was mine, and the cab had 1,100 gallons of the single most useful thing in a collapse, sitting on the frame behind me. And I keyed my own radio, not the fancy digital set the company had put in 2 years back that never worked, worth a damn above 11,000 feet. But the CB, the old stubborn CB that works when the sun's flaring and the towers are down and the whole modern world has gone to hash. I picked the channel the resort used for their shuttle drivers, the one I'd used 100 times to call ahead for the gate code. "This is the fuel truck at the lower Avalanche gate," I said, and I kept my voice flat and bored on purpose, because bored is a tool. Bored makes the other person calm down and match you. Somebody up top want to tell me why I'm locked out of a delivery I've got a signed work order for. For a long moment there was nothing but the crowd of voices sound, low underneath. Then it cut out, someone keying over it, and a woman's voice came through, tight and careful, the voice of someone reading off a script she'd written in her head 30 seconds earlier and didn't fully believe. "Fuel truck, this is Timberline Dispatch. Do not attempt to reach the resort. The road is closed. Sit tight, keep your engine warm, conserve your fuel, and this is important. Do not open your cab for anyone who comes down that road toward you on foot. Do you copy that?" I looked at the road again through the windshield, up past the arm. Empty, white, climbing away into black. The snow came at the glass in long, slanting lines that the headlights lit up and the dark swallowed. "Copy," I said slowly. "But you're going to have to walk me through the part about people on foot, because that's not a normal thing to say to a man, and I've been doing this 18 years, and I've heard a lot of normal things." She didn't answer that, not directly. The channel hissed, and I could hear her breathing on the open key, fast and shallow, the breathing of somebody who's been holding it together for a long time, in front of other people, and just got a stranger's voice to hold it together in front of instead, which is somehow harder. Then she said, "How much fuel are you carrying?" And that question, the specific read in it, the way she asked about the diesel before she asked whether I was hurt, or alone, or scared, or how far I'd come, before she asked me one single human thing, that's the moment I understood I hadn't driven into a road closure. I'd driven into something that was already sorting people into columns, already deciding who mattered. And the thing that decided whether I mattered was sitting in the tank behind my head. Let me back up. because you need to understand how a man ends up alone at the bottom of a closed mountain with a tanker full of fuel and no good options. And none of that starts with monsters. Nothing bad ever does. It starts with a schedule. I'd left the Leadville terminal at 3 that afternoon on a run I'd made 40, 50 times. Easy. Timberline Reach isn't one of the big names. It's a mid-size operation tucked up in Halverson Basin, a place that survives on being a little cheaper and a little emptier than the Summit County resorts an hour north. The kind of mountain that gets the families who can't afford Vail and the locals who can't stand it. They run their own backup power off a private diesel farm, 3 big generators, and a bank of storage tanks down below the main lodge, because the grid up there is a bad joke every single time it snows hard. And it was going to snow hard. That was the whole reason for the run. There was a system coming in off the Pacific, one of those long-fetch atmospheric river storms that stacks up against the west face of the Sawatch and just parks. And the resort wanted their tanks topped off before the road got dicey. Standard, boring, the kind of run I could do half asleep and mostly had over the years. The first strange thing happened at the Leadville terminal, and I didn't think a thing of it at the time, which is how strange things always work. They only turn strange in the rear view. My dispatcher was a good young woman named Petra Lund, ran the board with a headset and 3 monitors and a coffee that was always cold because she was always too busy to drink it, and she never got rattled. I'd seen her stay calm through a jackknifed rig on Fremont Pass and through a driver having a heart attack in the lot. But that afternoon, Petra was rattled. She'd taken 3 calls in an hour, she told me, from resorts up and down the valley, all of them wanting their fuel deliveries moved up, all of them wanting more than they usually ordered, and 2 of them asking whether we could deliver straight to the staff dormitories instead of the main farm. She said it to me like it was a scheduling puzzle, an annoyance, a Tetris problem with tanker trucks. I heard it like weather, because when everybody suddenly wants more of the same thing at the same time, in the same afternoon, without talking to each other, that's not coincidence. That's a bunch of people all responding to something they've each heard, and you haven't. "You hear anything about the interstate?" she asked me while I did my walk around. And I remember she followed me out into the yard to ask it, which she never did. I was crouched at the front axle checking the tire chains hung ready in the rack. Like what? Like they closed the eastbound at the Eisenhower Tunnel around noon, and nobody's saying why. Not a wreck, not chains, not control work, just closed. My cousin's stuck on the Dillon side, and she says there's no information at all. Just troopers turning everybody around and not answering questions. She hugged her clipboard to her chest against the cold and gave a little shrug that wasn't a real shrug. Probably an avalanche control thing that ran long. Probably, I said, and I believed it, because in February in the Colorado high country, that is the boring answer, and the boring answer is almost always the true one. I finished my walk-around tires, chains, lights, the placards front and back and both sides, the emergency kit behind the seat, the fire extinguisher, the spill kit, the 2 wheel chocks. I signed the manifest on Petra's clipboard. I climbed up into the cab, that long haul up into a seat that sits 9 feet off the ground, and I pulled the door shut and settled into the smell of it. Diesel and old coffee and the pine air freshener I kept swapping out and never quite believing in. The last thing Petra said to me, standing down in the yard looking up at my window, was, "Hey, text me when you're headed back down, okay? Not the truck radio, your phone." Which was strange, because we never texted. Company policy, liability, all of it. You use the radio, you log the radio is the record. But she said it with her chin set in a particular way. And I nodded. And I forgot it inside of a mile. I've thought about that chin every day since. The drive up 91 was fine for the first half hour, fine and empty. Traffic was light for a Friday, way lighter than it should have been with a storm bearing down, when normally that road would be a slow-moving parade of Denver SUVs racing the snow to their weekend rentals, roof boxes and bike racks and out-of-state plates, everybody in a hurry to get to the mountains before the mountains closed. I passed maybe 6 vehicles in the first 40 minutes. And here's the thing I noticed and dismissed. Every single one of them was coming down. Not one was going up but me. Coming down in the early dark, ahead of a storm, when the smart weekend money should have been going up. I told myself the smart ones had left early, had beaten the storm up the hill hours ago, and were already unpacking in their rentals with the fireplaces going. That's the kind of thing you tell yourself when you're a man alone in a warm cab who wants the world to stay simple. The radio started acting up around climax, up near the old molybdenum mine where the road tops out over 11,000 feet and the trees give up, and it's just wind and tailings, ponds, and the skeleton of old mining infrastructure standing black against the snow. First, the FM went to hash, station by station, which is normal up there, the terrain eats the signal. Then the CB started acting up, which is not normal because the CB is line of sight and stubborn and mean. And it was full of that overlapping talk, that sound of too many people on a channel that should have been empty at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. I caught fragments as I drove, my thumb resting on the squelch. Somebody, a man, saying, "Won't go down, I'm telling you. I hit it twice with the truck and it just got back up. And somebody else, a woman with a trucker's flat cadence saying, "Anybody actually at Copper right now? Because I'm looking at the main lot, and there's people just standing in it, just standing, they're not..." And then a wash of other voices drowning them both. I reached over and turned it down. I've spent a lot of long nights up on that pass, and the radio does strange things in the deep cold. Propagation does funny tricks. Distant signals skip in off the ionosphere and ghost around. That's what I told myself. I was very, very good that whole afternoon at telling myself things. The snow started for real as I came down off the climax grade toward the Halverson turnoff. Not the pretty kind that photographs well. The other kind. The kind that comes in sideways on a hard wind and turns the whole world into a gray tunnel with your own high beams bouncing straight back into your eyes. So you have to drop to the low beams and lean forward over the wheel. I slowed to a crawl, dropped 2 gears, and felt the weight of 1,100 gallons pushing at my back through every curve. That liquid surge as the fuel sloshed in the baffles and shoved at the truck like a big patient hand that wanted me going faster than was safe. A loaded tanker on a mountain grade in a whiteout is a very specific kind of alone. You are one small, warm animal inside a very large amount of momentum, and the only thing between you and the trees is your own patience and the honest grip of 6-drive tires on wet snow. You learn to love your own caution up there. It's the only friend you've got. The Halverson turnoff has a sign, a CDOT electronic sign on a steel post, the kind that tells you the road status up to the resort. Green means open. Yellow means chains required. Red means closed. It's a dumb, reliable, honest little machine, and I'd read it 100 times without a thought. That evening, it was dark. Not red, not any color. Off. Black glass. And in 18 years, I had never once seen that sign off, because it runs off the resort's grid feed, and it has a sealed battery backup that CDOT swears will run it a full day if the power drops. For that sign to be dark, somebody would have had to cut the power at the source and drain or disconnect the backup. Or the backup was already dead from something that had been going on a lot longer than an afternoon. I sat at that turnoff with my left blinker going tick, tick, tick. The only sound in the cab besides the diesel idling its low, steady heartbeat and the snow ticking against the windshield. I sat there long enough that a small, cold voice in the back of my head, the same voice that had noticed all 6 vehicles were coming down, the voice I'd spent all afternoon talking over, told me to turn around. Told me plain, turn around, Wes, go home. The sign's dark and the interstate's shut and everybody's coming down but you. And I made the decision I would go on to remake 100, 1,000 times in the months after. I turned up the mountain. I had a signed work order. I had 1,100 gallons somebody was expecting and paying for. And the boring answer, the one I trusted, was that a sign had failed. The way signs fail, and a failed sign is not a reason to blow off a delivery and eat the cost. So I flicked off the blinker, dropped into the low gear, and turned the tanker up the Halvorsen Road, into the dark, toward the flickering lights. I was maybe a mile up when the Avalanche gates at the lower switchback began to close in front of me, all on their own, with the amber strobe turning, and that brings us right back around to where I started this. Me standing in 12-degree air with my glove flat against a hydraulic ram that wouldn't budge, listening to a woman up the mountain ask me how much fuel I was carrying before she asked me a single human thing. Enough, I told her over the CB, after too long a pause, after I'd climbed back into the cab and locked the door. Enough that you want to talk to me nice. Now give me the real answer, not the dispatch voice. What is actually happening up there? The channel hissed. When she came back, her voice had dropped the flat, script-reading tone and gone into something a lot worse and a lot more honest. The situation is, I don't know. That's the honest answer, and it's the worst one. We had staff and guests start getting sick this morning, early. And it was fast, Wes. That's the part I keep, it was fast. Fever, high, right away. Then they stop making sense when you talk to them. They answer the wrong questions. They look at you like they can't quite place you. And then they get different, aggressive. Not like a sick person's cranky. Different. She stopped and I heard her swallow. We've got the main lodge sealed up and about 40 people inside it. And we've got, I don't even know how many of the others out in the snow. And Wes, they don't feel the cold. You understand what I'm telling you? It is 12 degrees out there and dropping, and they're out in it in shirt sleeves. Some of them, staff in their polo shirts, and they don't shiver, they don't hug themselves, they don't do anything. They just stand, and then they move. I did not, at that moment, believe her. I want to be honest about that, because every single thing I did wrong, for the next hour, flowed straight out of not believing her. I thought I was talking to a frightened woman in a genuinely bad situation who had wrapped a normal emergency, a bad norovirus sweep through a resort. Maybe a couple of guests who'd mixed altitude and liquor and edibles and come unglued in the kind of apocalyptic language that fear puts in your mouth when you've been trapped and scared for hours with no information. I'm a practical man. My whole trade is making problems smaller. You don't panic at a fuel spill, you contain it. You don't panic at a jackknife, you set your triangles and you work the recovery. So I did what I always do. I made my voice calm, and I tried to make the problem smaller. Okay, I said. Okay. What's your name? A breath. Iris Kilate. I run the front desk. I've run the front desk here for 6 years, and I've never once had a night like this. And I need you to not tell me it's going to be fine. Because everybody in this lobby keeps telling me it's going to be fine, and I can see out the windows. I wasn't going to tell you that, I said. And I meant it. And something in her breathing eased a quarter turn. Here's what we're going to do, Iris. I'm going to sit right here, warm, engine running. And you're going to keep talking to me so neither of us is alone with it. And when CDOT or the county gets a plow and a crew up here, we'll sort out this gate. Somebody's coming. Somebody always comes. That's how it works up here. The mountain scares people, and then the trucks with the flashing lights show up, and it gets boring again. "Nobody's coming," Iris said, and there was no argument in it, just exhaustion. "That's what I've been trying to make you understand. We have been calling since 10 o'clock this morning. The county said they'd send a deputy. The state patrol said they'd send someone up. And then around 2 in the afternoon, the calls just the person on the other end of the line started sounding like us. Scared, not in control, asking us questions instead of answering ours. And then the lines went to that noise." She paused. "You hear that noise on your radio? Underneath? The people all talking at once noise?" I looked down at my CB, turned low, still murmuring its crowd underneath everything. That sound like a stadium, heard from a mile off. "Yeah, I hear it. That's everybody," Iris said very quietly. "That's what I think it is anyway. That's everybody, all at once, all over, trying to reach somebody, and nobody answering. Now, I'll tell you the exact thing that finally made me believe her, because I don't expect you to believe her from words on a radio any more than I did." While she was talking, headlights swung across the snow up the road above me. Real headlights, white and doubled. A vehicle coming down from the direction of the resort, and coming way too fast for the conditions, sliding through the top switchback with its back end stepping out. My first thought, God help me, was relief. Pure animal relief. Somebody with authority. Somebody coming down to open the gate to make this boring again. A manager or a cop or a plow driver. I hit my four ways, and I had opened my door, and I stood up on the step and waved both arms over my head. It was a resort shuttle. One of those short, white cutaway buses they used to run guests up from the lower overflow lot. Timberline Reach stenciled on the side in blue, a rack of skis empty on the back. It came down the switchback in a controlled skid, corrected, and stopped hard maybe 30 yards up the road from the gate on the far side, nose canted toward the berm. The driver's door swung open. A man stepped down out of it, and he left the door standing open behind him. And the dome lights stayed on inside the bus, so that even through the slanting snow in the dark, I could see him clean and whole, the way you see one lit figure on an otherwise black stage. He was wearing a short-sleeved resort polo shirt, blue tucked in, a lanyard around his neck. No coat, no hat, nothing. And he stood there in the full teeth of that wind, in 12-degree air with the wind chill pulling it down toward zero. And he stood in it the way you'd stand on a warm porch in June. Loose, unbothered. The wind moved his hair and his shirt, and it did not move him. He looked down the road at me, at my waving arms, at my truck, and he did not call out. He did not wave back. He did not do any of the 10,000 small things a cold man does. He just looked, and then he started walking toward the gate, toward me. And he didn't walk like a cold man walks on ice, hunched down and arms out and each foot testing the ground. He walked straight and level and even, and something about the evenness of it, the way nothing in him was braced against the cold, turned my stomach over before my brain had caught up. And behind him, out of the open bus door, 2 more of them climbed down into the snow. One of them went straight down onto the road, no attempt to catch itself, no flinch, and then got up in a smooth, wrong motion and kept coming, like the fall had been of no more consequence than a blink. I got back in my cab. I locked the door, which is about the most useless thing a man can do. When 1,100 gallons of diesel and 40,000 pounds of steel are already the only wall that matters. But the hand does it anyway. The hand needs to do something. Over the CB, Iris was saying my name over and over. Wes, answer me. Did somebody just come down in the shuttle? Wes, please, tell me you didn't get out of the truck. I got out of the truck, I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, thin, higher than usual. It's fine, I'm back in. There's 3 of them. One was driving the shuttle. They're coming to the gate. Do not open your door, Iris said. And she wasn't reading any script now. She was pleading, the words tumbling. The gate's between you and them, and it's locked. It's a good lock. It'll hold. Just don't open your door. And Wes, this is going to sound insane, but don't let them catch you looking straight at their faces for too long. The ones who lock eyes with you, they get fixed on you. I don't know why. I can't explain it. Just don't stare and don't be still. Movement and sound are what they follow. So keep your engine running, because a running engine is just noise to them. But a face going quiet at a window is just do what I say, please. The man in the polo shirt reached the gate arm. He put both hands on it, palms flat, in the same spot on the cold yellow steel where my glove had been not 5 minutes before. And he pushed. The ram held, I could see it hold, but I watched the whole yellow arm flex under the load, a visible bow in solid steel. And something in my chest went cold and certain in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. A cold man cannot do that. A cold man's hands are stiff claws by now, no grip, no power. A well man, a strong, healthy man in a gym, would strain and grunt and give up. This one pushed again, harder, silent, no grunt, no breath fogging. And the arm bowed further, and the amber strobe turned across his upturned face, and he was staring straight down the road at my windshield, at me. And his eyes had the flat, wet shine you see in an animal's eyes when the headlights catch them at the edge of the road, except an animal blinks, an animal flinches. An animal's face is doing something. His wasn't. He pushed a 3rd time, and I swear I heard the mounting bolts groan even over the diesel and the wind. And then he simply stopped and stood and stared, snow gathering on his shoulders and in his hair and on his bare forearms, melting nowhere. If you've ever been trapped somewhere and had that first real moment, the moment where the thing you've been refusing to believe stops being a scary story somebody's telling you and becomes a fact, a physical fact, standing 30 feet from your face and pushing on a steel gate with its bare hands in weather that should be killing it. I would genuinely like to know where you were when it happened to you. A car wreck, a fire, a bad night in a place you shouldn't have been. And I'd like to know whether you did what I did, which was absolutely nothing, which was sit frozen behind the wheel with my heart slamming and just watch. I've had a long time to think about it, and I've come to believe the freezing is the most human thing there is. It's the part of you that still thinks this is a picture on a screen and not a thing that can reach you. The gate held. That's the important part. And it's the whole reason I need you to hold the shape of that mountain in your mind. Because the geography is the entire story. The lower Avalanche gate sat right at a switchback, at the tightest pinch of the whole road. Below it, downhill, the road ran back 2 miles to the Halverson turnoff and the dark status sign, and 91 and the wide ordinary world. Above it, uphill, the road climbed 2 miles of switchbacks up to the resort in the basin. And at the gate itself, the road was choked to its narrowest, a blasted cut through solid granite on the uphill side, walls of rock going straight up, and on the downhill side, a plowed snow berm, the height of the hood, and then a drop-off into black timber. The gate was the only real choke point on the entire mountain. There was no going around it. Everything the resort was afraid of was above it. Everything I still wanted the road home. Petra, my own bed, the boring world was below it. And I was parked in the last 20 yards of neutral ground in between the two, with the arm down, on the wrong side of my own way out. The three of them worked at the gate for a while. It wasn't smart work, I want to be clear about that. There was no problem solving in it. It was just pushing, and then a kind of drifting loss of interest. The man in the polo shirt turning half away, as if he'd forgotten what he was doing. And then a fourth one, wandering down the road, out of the dark, a woman in an expensive-looking ski jacket, unzipped, hood down. And her arrival at the gate seemed to remind the others of the idea. And all of them pushed again. Like the idea of pushing was a thing that could catch from one to the next. The cold did nothing to any of them that I could see. Snow built up on their shoulders and in their hair and along their bare arms, and it just sat there, not melting, because there was no warmth in them left to melt it. That detail is the one that comes back to me at 2 in the morning, more than any other. The snow that wouldn't melt on their skin. After maybe 15 minutes, the man in the polo shirt turned and walked back up the road toward the shuttle, unhurried. And one by one, the others lost the thread and drifted after him, up the switchback, and were swallowed back into the gray and the dark. I watched the shuttle's dome light for a long time, a little yellow smear up the mountain, until it too was gone. Then I sat there, with both my hands shaking on the wheel and the diesel idling, and my breath finally starting to fog the inside of the glass. And I keyed the radio. Iris, they left. They went back up the road. They do that, she said, and the relief in her voice was worn thin, the relief of someone who's felt this particular relief too many times in one day for it to mean much anymore. They lose the thread. Something gets their attention and holds it, and then it just stops holding it, and they move on to the next thing that's loud or bright or warm. There's no plan in them, Wes. That's the only mercy in the whole thing. There's no plan. She took a breath. I need you to really understand your situation now. Because you keep talking like help is on its way, and it is not. Listen to me. We have got 40 people inside this lodge, and enough food, if we're careful, for maybe 3 days. And our generators are running on fumes, because the storm knocked out our grid feed this morning around the same time people started getting sick. And we've been running the whole building, heat, lights, the walk-in freezers, all of it off backup diesel for going on 9 hours now. When those generators run dry, the heat dies, and the forecast low tonight is 20 below. I looked at my fuel gauge. 1,100 gallons, give or take, the needle sitting fat and full. I looked up the road at the dark where the shuttle had gone. You want the diesel? I said. It wasn't a question, and I didn't ask it like one. I want the diesel, Iris agreed. And there was no shame in it, just fact. And you want to be inside a heated stone building with 40 other people tonight, instead of sitting in a truck cab that's going to be a walk-in freezer by 3 in the morning, the second you shut that engine off to save fuel. So the truth is, we want the same thing. We're on the same side. We've just got a locked gate and 2 miles of mountain, and God only knows how many of them in between us and it. That was the shape of it, laid out plain and honest, inside the first hour. A resort full of people dying by slow degrees of cold and hunger. And the one thing that could save them fuel, warmth, time sitting a mile down the road behind a gate that the resort's own people had ordered slammed shut that morning to keep the sick things penned in. And me, the man with the fuel, on the wrong side of the only door. Here's a thing I've learned across a whole working life of hauling. Fuel is never the problem. Fuel is potential, and potential is patient. Potential will sit in a tank forever and ask nothing of you. The problem is always the last 100 feet. The hose, the coupling, the code to the gate. The one human being who has to be physically standing there to sign for it and hand you the key. I was sitting on 1,100 gallons that could keep 40 people alive for 2 weeks. And every drop of it was worth exactly nothing, as long as it was stuck on the wrong side of a steel arm built to stop an avalanche. Iris and I worked the problem for the next hour, her at a front desk inside a sealed lodge 2 miles up the mountain, me in a truck cab watching the gauge and the road and the fog of my own breath on the glass. And the plan we built had 3 parts, and every single part was bad. Part 1 was the gate. The lower gate ran off the same CDOT control box as the dead status sign, and both were dead, which meant somebody had cut the power at the source. And Iris knew where the source was, a little utility shed about halfway up the resort road, where the resort's grid feed came in from the valley, and where CDOT had piggybacked their gate and sign controls off the same feed years back to save the cost of running their own line. Somebody, she thought, had gone down to that shed in the first blind panic of the morning and killed the power to seal the road, gate down. No way for anyone to raise it electrically from either end. And if it couldn't be raised electrically, it would have to be raised by hand. There was a manual override on the gate, a ratcheting crank that lived in a steel lockbox bolted to the concrete control pillar right beside the arm. And the key to that lockbox lived, of course, where every key on that mountain lived, on the maintenance master ring, up in the resort, 2 miles up, behind everything. Part 2 was the pump. Once the gate was up, I'd drive the tanker the 2 miles up to the fuel farm, a fenced compound below and east of the main lodge. 3 generators and the tank bank on a gravel pad, couple the discharge hose to the fill, and pump. 45 minutes minimum to move a full load. Standing out in the open at the coupling the whole time, exposed, a warm, loud man beside a running pump on an open pad. Part 3 was survival. Get inside the lodge after, and stay alive behind its walls until somebody, someday, somehow, came up that mountain to end it. So the whole thing hinges on that override key, I said. And the key's up there with you. It's up here with us, Iris confirmed. On the maintenance master ring, which is in Dellery's office, 2nd floor. And the 2nd floor's sealed and secure. That's where we've all got everyone. So getting the ring is the easy part. I can walk up and get the ring in 5 minutes. The problem isn't getting the key. The problem is getting the key to you. Because between this sealed lodge and that gate, there are 2 miles of open mountain road. In the dark, in a storm that's building, with an unknown number of things out in it that walk around in 12-degree wind in their shirt sleeves and follow noise and light and heat. Somebody has to carry that key down, on foot or I come up, I said, before I'd even finished thinking it. Because that's the man I am. I'd rather move toward a problem than sit still and rot in front of it. And that exact instinct has saved my life, just about as many times as it's nearly ended it. You will not, said a new voice, cutting in on the channel. A man's voice, older than Iris, with the flat, easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the last word in whatever room he's in. You'll stay right where you are with that truck. That truck is the only thing on this entire mountain that matters now. And I'm not about to have our one and only fuel source out, wandering up a road full of infected on foot in the dark. Are we clear on that, driver? Who's this? I said. This is Garrick Ostrand. I'm the operations director for the resort. I've got command of this facility and everyone inside it. And as of right now, that command extends to you and your cargo both. I want to take a minute and tell you about Garrick Ostrand, because everything that happened later ran straight through him. And if you've ever in your life worked under a man who mistook the sound of his own authority for actual competence, then you already know him, you've already met him, and you can skip ahead if you want. He had a voice built for good news and bad decisions. A warm, round, confident radio voice. The kind of voice that reads the safety briefing and welcomes you to the property. And over the next several hours, as we planned and argued and the mercury fell and the diesel in my truck stayed heavy behind me, Garrick took control of that radio the exact way certain men take control of a meeting, not by knowing the most, but by talking the longest and objecting the first. He wasn't cruel, not at the start. He was something more dangerous than cruel. He was certain. He had a spreadsheet where his gut should have been, and in that spreadsheet the truck was an asset. The 40 people were a head count, and I was a resource to be positioned on a map. Iris deferred to him on the radio the way you defer to your boss in front of guests. But I started to notice that she'd wait a beat after he finished talking, half a second, and then she'd quietly tell me the one true thing he'd just left out. I came to trust the beat after Garrick more than I trusted anything Garrick said in it. The plan Garrick built, and he made sure it was his plan, made sure I understood it was his plan, was this. 2 of the resort's people, young, fit ski patrollers who knew every foot of that mountain in the dark, would take the maintenance master ring and bring it down the road to the gate on snowmobiles. Snowmobiles were the answer, he said, because they were fast, and fast meant staying ahead of anything that noticed you. They'd ride down, hand me the ring over the top of the gate, I'd crank it open by hand, and then they'd lead me back up the mountain in their packed track. Headlights first, me and the tanker following. Simple, fast, in and out. It might even have worked. I've thought about that too. It might genuinely have worked, if the mountain hadn't been listening. The 2 patrollers were named Sunny Achak, and a kid everyone called Bricks, whose given name was Bryson Iverson, 23 years old, out of Gunnison, a big, cheerful, red-headed kid who'd earned the nickname by carrying a full pallet of paving stones up a service staircase, one at a time, on a $100 bet and winning it. Sunny Achak was older, 35 or so, a Dine woman from up near Shiprock who'd come to Timberline as a seasonal patroller a decade back, lured hunter and stayed on because the mountains suited her better than any place else had. I never met either of them face to face before that night. I met them first as voices on a radio, calm and competent. The kind of calm you only get from people whose whole job is other people's worst days. And then I met them in the snow. And I'll carry both of those meetings the rest of my life, one longer than the other. They set out from the lodge a little after 9. Iris kept the channel open and narrated it to me, because I couldn't see the top of the mountain from where I sat. Only the switchbacks lower down. I saw them first as 2 small, jerking points of light working their way down through the trees, headlights bouncing, appearing and vanishing behind the folds of the slope, and I could hear the machines before I could really see them. That high, angry 2-stroke whine carrying down the mountain, thin and sharp against the dull roar of the wind. "They're at the water tank turn," Iris said. "They're clear, nothing on the road there." "Okay, they're at the 3rd switchback. Hold on." And her voice went tight. "There's some in the trees off the road there, a few. They see them, but the machines are fast. They're okay. They're past. They're through. They didn't stop. They're coming down to you now, Wes. Last stretch. Get out and get ready on the gate. They're going to want to hand it off and keep moving." I got out. 12 degrees, feeling like less. The wind carving straight down through the granite cut and finding every gap in my clothing. I pulled my hood tight and stood at the gate arm on my side. Gloves on, ready, and I could hear the snowmobiles clearer now. That insect scream bouncing off the rock walls and doubling. And then their headlights swung hard around the last bend above me. And there they were. The 2 machines. 2 riders bundled in red patrol shells, decelerating fast down the last straight toward the gate, throwing rooster tails of snow. And behind them, Following the sound, following the light, came the others. Not fast. That's the thing nobody had told me right. The thing Garrick's whole plan had gotten wrong. They weren't fast. They came out of the trees on both sides of the road above the gate. And there were a dozen, then more than a dozen, then more than I could count in the dark and the strobe. And they didn't run so much as flow. A steady, wrong-footed pour of bodies coming down toward the two headlights, and the engine noise, like the noise itself, was a thing they could eat. Slow, individually. But there were so many, and they came from everywhere at once, and they never stopped. And I understood in one gut-drop instant that speed had never been the danger. Relentlessness was the danger. You can outrun a slow thing once. You cannot outrun a slow thing that is patient and everywhere and never tires. "Behind you," I shouted, which was useless. They couldn't have heard me over their own engines if I'd had a bullhorn. But Sunny saw them anyway. She'd been a patroller 10 years. She was already looking back over her shoulder out of pure habit, reading the slope behind her the way she'd read 100 avalanche paths. She gunned her machine the last 100 feet to the gate and laid it broadside in a hard skid, and she was off it. And at the arm before Bricks had even fully stopped. And she had the master ring out of her chest pocket. And she was jamming it through the gap under the arm at me. Screaming over the engines, her face wild in the strobe light. "Take it. Take it, the round one. The round key's the override. The round one. Do you hear me?" I took it. My hands were shaking so badly, from cold and from the rest of it, that I dropped the whole ring in the snow and had to go down on one knee and dig for it with clumsy gloved fingers while my heart tried to come up my throat. Behind Sunny, Bricks had stopped his machine, and I still don't fully understand the courage of what he did next. I don't think I ever will. He turned his snowmobile to face uphill, into the coming flood. And he stood up on the running boards and started revving the engine hard, redlining it, and waving one arm over his head, making himself the loudest and biggest and brightest thing on that whole mountain. Pulling them. Pulling all of it toward himself and away from Sunny and away from me and the gate. And it worked. Of course it worked. Their whole attention swung toward the biggest noise. The way it always swung, the way Iris had said. And the flood poured toward Bricks. He held his ground on the running boards, with the throttle screaming until the very last possible second. And then he dropped down and tried to spin the machine and get it turned to run. And the deep, unpacked snow off the shoulder grabbed the track. And the track spun and dug and threw a fan of snow, and the machine didn't move. And I watched 23 years of a big, cheerful kid from Gunnison who'd carried a pallet of pavers up a staircase on a bet get closed over by a crowd of people in ski clothes who did not feel the cold. I heard him over the wind for about 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Then I heard the snowmobile engine, racing wide open with no hand on the throttle. A mechanical scream with nobody riding it. And then I did not hear the kid at all anymore. "Bricks!" Sunny was screaming through the gate. Both fists on the yellow arm now. "Bricks, get up, get up!" I found the round key. I don't know how. My hands weren't mine anymore. But I found it by feel, round-headed among all the others, and I got it into the lockbox and turned it, and the little steel door dropped open, and there was the crank, folded, and I got it out, and got it seated on the ratchet shaft, and I started to turn. 12 turns of the crank for every foot the arm rose, the ratchet clacking, the whole mechanism stiff with cold and grease gone thick. And the crowd that had closed over Bricks was already losing the thread of a dead racing engine that no longer moved or looked at anything, already turning back around toward the living, warm sound of Sunny's idling machine and my running diesel and the two upright, warm animals standing at the gate. I want to stop the story here just for a breath, because if you have never in your life had to keep your hands working steadily at a task while something behind you was coming, you truly do not know how loud your own body becomes. The blood in your ears is a drum. Your own breath is a bellows. The scrape and clack of the ratchet is the whole world. And you find yourself counting out loud, without deciding to, 8, 9, 10, 11, marking the turns, marking the inches, marking the feet, as if the counting will make the gate come up faster. If you've been there in the wreck, in the fire, in the cold, you know that sound, the sound of your own body gone loud. Tell me where you were. I'd honestly like to know I'm not the only one who's heard it. The arm came up, foot by clacking foot. Sunny abandoned her snowmobile, no time to get it turned in that snow. And she just watched what happened to a man who tried. And instead, she climbed the rising arm as it went up, hauled herself up and over, and dropped down onto my side. And the two of us ran flat out for the cab. I got there first, up the step, in, and I hauled her up after me across the driver's seat into the passenger side, and I dropped it into gear. And here's the thing. I did not go up the mountain the way the plan said. I couldn't. The mountain above the gate was full of them now, a whole living hillside of them coming down toward the last of the noise. And Bricks was gone, and the road up was a moving river of bodies. And I had a living, breathing patroller in my passenger seat, with her hood knocked back and her chest heaving. And the road down was clear, empty, white, open. So I made the first real choice of that night. And it was not Garrick's choice, and it was not the plan. I dropped the tanker into its lowest gear, and I drove down, away from the resort, away from the 40 people who needed the fuel, toward the dark status sign and the turnoff and the boring world. Because the kid was dead, and the road up was death, and I had a living person beside me. And in that one moment, keeping Sunny Achak breathing mattered more to me than 1,100 gallons and 40 strangers I'd never met. Garrick's voice came up on the CB, and it had lost every ounce of its command tone calm. "Where are you going?" Driver, you are going the wrong way. That fuel is the only You turn that truck around. You do not have the authority to. I reached over and turned the radio off. First time all night. The silence in the cab after was enormous. Just the diesel and the wipers and Sunny's breathing. She was in the passenger seat with her hood down, and her dark hair snow-melted flat and her face wet. And she wasn't crying loud. She was crying the quiet way. The way people cry when they've just watched a thing they will never be able to unwatch. No sound, just leaking. Staring straight ahead at the wiper pushing the snow off the glass in its slow, patient arc. I let her be. There was nothing to say, and I've never been a man who fills silence for its own sake. I drove. The road down was clear for the first full mile, and I let myself feel for exactly that mile. The enormous animal relief of going downhill and away, downhill toward everything I still stupidly believed was safe. Then I came around the switchback above the Halverson turnoff, and my headlights swung across the dark status sign, black glass on its post. And past it, down where the resort road met Highway 91, there were vehicles, a lot of vehicles, stopped at angles across both lanes and the shoulder, doors standing open, hazards blinking on a couple of them, the way people leave cars when they leave them in a hurry and don't intend to come back. And in among the vehicles, moving slow and unhurried between the open doors and the dark, in shirt sleeves and ski coats, and one of them in a hotel bathrobe. In the falling snow, there were more of them than I had seen all night at the gate. Dozens. The whole Lode Junction was full of them. They weren't up on the resort road because the resort road led up to nothing they wanted. They were down here, at the crossroads, where the people had been, where 91 met the mountain. At the interstate, the state had closed at noon, for a reason nobody would say out loud. The world I had been driving toward, the boring, safe world, was worse than the mountain I was driving from. I stopped the truck, brought it to a slow stop right there in the middle of the resort road with the crossroads laid out below in my lights. And I just looked at it. Sunny wiped her face with the heel of her glove, one hard swipe. And she looked too. And she looked longer and more carefully than I did, reading it. And then she said the first full sentence she'd spoken since the gate. "You can't take the tanker through that." Her voice was rough but steady, patroller steady. The crying folded up and put away somewhere she'd deal with it later or never. You'd have to slow almost to a stop to make the turn onto 91, and the second you slow, they'll be on you. And if you're at the coupling anywhere down here, you're finished. And even if you made the turn, where would you go, Wes? The interstate's closed both directions. They shut it at noon. Whatever this is, it's not just the mountain. It's down here worse than up there. She turned in the seat and looked at me straight. And her eyes were clear now, dry, hard, the eyes of a person who has just done the terrible math and gotten a terrible answer and isn't going to pretend otherwise. There is nothing down here. There's less down here than up top. Up top we've got stone walls and a door that locks and 40 people. Down here we've got a crossroads full of them and a highway closed at both ends. She was right. I knew she was right the instant she said it. Felt it drop into place like the last gear engaging. And I hated it with everything in me. The instinct that had made me drive down, protect the one living person in front of you, run from the horror behind you, was exactly the wrong instinct. Down was the trap. Down was where all the warm people had already gone and been taken. Up was the fortress. And the fuel I'd been running from was also the only thing that could keep the fortress warm and lit and alive. Everything I wanted was in the direction I did not want to go. "They'll never let us back in," I said. "Garrick." I turned the radio off on the man mid-sentence and drove his only fuel supply the wrong way down the mountain. And he struck me as the type who keeps a ledger. "He is," Sunny said, flat. "He absolutely does. But Iris runs the front door, Wes, not Garrick. Garrick runs his mouth and his head count, but Iris runs the door. And Iris knows that a truck with fuel in it is worth more than any grudge Garrick's nursing. So," she almost smiled, and it was about the grimmest thing I have ever seen on a human face. "Turn your radio back on. Let's go beg." I turned it back on. It came alive mid-sentence, full of Garrick, a man who'd apparently been talking steadily to a dead channel for 10 minutes, and only now was going to find out nobody had heard a word. I keyed right over the top of him. "Ostrand, this is the driver. Listen, the valley's overrun. The crossroads at 91 is worse than anything up on your mountain, and the interstate's shut both ways. There's nowhere to run to down here. There's nothing down here at all. I'm bringing the fuel back up. I want your gate open and your people ready and standing by at the fuel farm when I get there, because I'm not going to want to sit exposed at that coupling 1 second longer than I have to. You copy?" There was a silence on the channel, a beat too long. And then Garrick came back, and his voice had gone smooth again. All the panic ironed right out of it, back to the good news host voice. And I should have heard the danger in exactly how fast and how completely he recovered. A man that rattled, going that calm that quick. "Copy that, driver. Smart decision. Very smart. We'll be ready for you. Bring it home. Bring it home. Like the resort was home. Like I was a son coming back for supper. I felt the wrongness of that phrase land somewhere in my chest even then, a splinter of it. But I was cold, and Sunny was cold, and the kid was dead in the snow up the mountain. And up top was a locking door and 40 living people, and down here was a crossroads full of the dead. So I turned the tanker around at the Halverson turnoff. And I'll tell you, that turn was the worst piece of driving I've ever done in my life. A 14-point turn on an icy grade with a granite wall on one side and a black drop on the other, backing 40,000 pounds toward a berm I couldn't see the far edge of. Sunny out on the running board in the cold, calling my clearance in feet. Back two, hold, cut it, come ahead. And I got the nose pointed back up the mountain, and I started climbing again. Back up the mountain I had just fled, hauling the fuel back toward the resort that had shut me out of it, with the round override key back in my pocket where I'd zipped it, and no idea in the world that the key in my pocket was the exact thing that would keep me useful right up until the precise moment it made me expendable. The drive back up took 40 minutes at a crawl, the storm heavier now, the snow coming so hard the plow berms were already softening back over, and the crowd on the resort road had thinned out, drifted some of it, had gone downhill toward the noise of the crossroads. Some had wandered back into the black timber, and I came to understand their whole logic that night just by watching it work in my headlights. They had no plan and no memory. They had only attention, and attention went to sound and to light and to heat, and it moved through the crowd of them like wind moving through a field of tall grass, all the heads turning at once toward the newest, loudest thing. If you were quiet and dark and cold, you were furniture, you were a fence post, you were nothing. If you were loud or bright or warm, you were the entire world, and every one of them would come to you. That single piece of knowledge, quiet, dark, cold means invisible, was the only real tool I got off that mountain, and I paid for it with a kid named Bricks. Sunny told me about the resort as I drove, in a flat briefing voice, because talking about the layout was easier than not talking, easier than sitting with what we'd both just watched. The lodge itself was the fortress 3 stories, native stone on the lower level and heavy timber above, one main guest entrance and one service entrance, both with commercial locks and better, both with heavy interior storm doors they'd already barred. 41 people inside it now, counting her and me as incoming. 42 if you counted a man in the little infirmary off the lobby who was sick but hadn't turned yet, who nobody wanted to count, whose count was the argument nobody in that building was having out loud. The fuel farm sat about 200 yards below and east of the lodge, down a short service spur, its own chain-link compound with a rolling gate, 3 big standby generators and the bank of storage tanks, and a graveled pad wide enough to swing a tanker in and back up to the fill coupling. The generators, she said, were down to fumes and running rough. When they quit, the lodge's heat quit, and the pumps that moved water quit, and it was going to be 20 below by 4 in the morning. The fuel in my truck was, in the most literal and unpoetic way possible, the exact difference between 41 people living through the night and 41 people freezing in the dark. So they need me, I said. They need the truck, Sunny said, and there was a warning folded into how carefully she said it. A warning I heard but didn't understand, not yet. There's a difference between those two things, Wes. And Garrick knows the difference, even if he won't ever say it out loud. We came up on the fuel farm a little after 10:30. Its floodlights were still on, the generators still turning. Barely, a rough, uneven note in the engines I could hear even over my own diesel. The sound of machines running on the dregs and the rolling gate to the compound stood wide open. And I felt a stupid, warm flood of relief at the sight of a gate standing open when I needed one open. After a whole night of gates, I swung the tanker wide on the pad and backed it. Slow, Sunny down on the ground, now guiding me with her hands in my mirrors, until my discharge outlet lined up with the tank farm's fill coupling. Then I set the brakes and killed the engine, and the silence after was enormous. 11 hours of diesel drone in my bones. And then nothing. Just the rough stutter of the resort's dying generators and the wind and the tick of my own engine cooling. Up the slope, 200 yards off through the driving snow. The lodge sat lit and solid and enormous against the storm. Wood smoke tearing sideways off 2 chimneys. And I could see figures moving warm and slow behind the second-floor windows. And I thought, for one clean whole minute, standing there in the cold with my breath fogging in the floodlights, that we had actually made it. That the worst was behind us. That this was the hard part, and we'd done it. I coupled the hose. This is the part I could do in my sleep, the part my hands have done 10,000 times. Pop the discharge cap, seat the camlock fitting, throw the arms home till they seat with that solid click. Clip the ground strap to the tank farm's grounding lug, because static and diesel vapor is how men die stupid. Crack the fill valve, check the seal. My hands knew all of it in the dark and the cold, moving on their own while my eyes stayed up on the slope. I started the pump. Diesel began to move out of my truck and into the resort's tanks at 40 gallons a minute. That heavy living surge coming up through the hose, and I stood at the coupling with Sunny beside me, both of us facing uphill, both of us listening hard past the chug of the pump for the sound of anything coming down out of the dark. And Garrick's voice came up on my belt radio, warm as a host welcoming me to the property. "Good work, driver. That's real good work. How long to transfer the load?" 45 minutes to move all of it," I said. "But you don't need all of it tonight, and I wouldn't give it to you if you did. Give me 20 minutes of pumping, and your tanks will have enough to run your generators a week. Easy. Maybe more if you shed load and shut down the freezers. I'd rather keep a few hundred gallons in the truck as a reserve." You never move your whole supply into one tank, Garrick. That's rule 1 of this trade. You keep a reserve in a second container that can move. Always. "Of course," Garrick said. "Of course. 20 minutes. Whatever you think best. You're the expert." And he agreed too easily. "I noticed it the way your foot notices a stair that's built a half-inch shorter than all the others. Your body registers the wrong of it a full beat before your mind puts words to it. A man who'd been that insistent all night, that the fuel was the only thing that mattered, that fuel in a truck that could drive away, was unacceptable, just rolled over on keeping a reserve in the truck. Agreed I was the expert? Sunny felt it too. She turned her head and looked at me across the coupling. And in the hard white floodlight, her face said the exact thing mine felt, which was, he agreed too easily. And men like that don't agree that easily. And something is wrong. I want to ask you something here, because I have turned it over more nights than I can count. When you're the one doing the useful work, when you're the one with the skill and the truck and the fuel, when you're standing out in the cold, making yourself the single most indispensable person to a frightened group of strangers, do you ever feel safest right in that exact moment? Because I did. Standing at that coupling, needed, essential, the man of the hour, I felt safe for the first time all night. And I've come to believe, in the years since, that being needed is the single most dangerous thing a person can feel in a collapse. Because the moment the need is finally met, the moment the last drop is pumped and the tanks are full, That's the moment you find out what you're actually worth to people, once you've already given them the only thing they wanted. Tell me if you've felt that. That dangerous, false safety of being the one who's useful. I'd like to know I'm not the only man who mistook it for the real thing. 20 minutes into the pump, with the resort's tanks reading a good, comfortable level, and 400 gallons still riding heavy in my truck. 3 things happened close together, so close they almost stacked. The first, the lodge's service door up the slope opened. A wedge of warm yellow light spilled out onto the snow, and 2 figures came out through it, moving fast and low and hunched. And they weren't infected, I could tell in an instant. They moved like scared living people, all their attention forward, bodies braced against the cold. One hand up to shield their faces from the wind. Hurrying down the service spur toward the fuel farm, I lifted a hand to wave them in, glad, thinking, here comes the help. Here come Garrick's people ready at the farm, like I asked. The second, Sunny said, very quietly, not turning her head. Wes, the compound gate. And I looked, and the rolling gate to the fuel farm, the one that had stood wide open and welcoming when I backed the tanker in, was closing. Sliding shut along its track, steady, mechanical. And there was nobody standing at it, nobody pushing it. It was the lower Avalanche gate all over again, a gate closing on its own in the dark, except this one wasn't sealing something out. It was sealing me in. Me and the truck and the 400 gallons still in it. The third, Garrick's voice on my belt radio, and it had dropped every ounce of the warm host, gone flat and final and administrative. Driver, stay at the pump. Finish the transfer, all of it, every drop. You keep that pump running until the truck reads dry, you understand me? All of it into the tanks. And I understood. Standing there with the hose live in my hand, and the gate sliding shut across the pad, and 2 hurrying figures coming down the slope. Exactly what had been decided about me and my truck while I was out here doing the useful work with my back turned. They didn't want my fuel in my truck, where the truck could still drive away, where the fuel gave the driver leverage, where I was a partner who could say no. They wanted it in their tanks. And the very second all of it was in their tanks, the truck was just empty steel. And I was just one more warm mouth to feed and one more share of the heat behind a door with 3 days of food. Sunny, I said low, the gate, go. She was already moving, cutting across the pad toward the closing gate at a dead run, but the 2 figures from the lodge got to it first, and now they were close enough that the floodlights caught them clean. And I saw them both plain. One was a heavy-set older man in a resort parka, hood up, a portable radio in his gloved hand. And I knew the voice before he even opened his mouth, knew the shape of the confidence in how he stood. The other was a younger man, and he was carrying a rifle, an actual hunting rifle, a bolt action with a scope, held down across his body at a low ready, not quite pointed at us, but not quite not. The muzzle drifting in that careful, deliberate way that's meant to be a question and a threat, both. The older man reached the gate's control box on the far side, and he stopped the gate and held it there, half closed, 4 feet of gap left. A threat you could measure with a tape. Here is the thing I understand now, that I did not understand then. And it changes how you hear everything that comes after. So I want to lay it out plain, the way I finally laid it out for myself. Garrick Ostrand had done the arithmetic the exact moment I'd keyed up and said I was bringing the fuel back up the mountain. 41 people, 3 days of food, 20 below outside and dropping. A siege of unknown length against a threat nobody understood, with no help coming, maybe ever. And in a situation like that, A man who thinks in spreadsheets doesn't look at 41 people and see 41 people. He sees a denominator. Every single person inside that lodge is a fraction of the food and a share of the heat and a subtraction from how long the whole thing lasts. And the fuel he needed in his tanks, not in my truck, because fuel in my truck was fuel that could leave. Fuel that gave the driver a vote, fuel that made me a partner he had to keep happy, instead of a supplicant he could ration. Get the fuel out of the mobile truck and into the fixed tanks, and the driver stops being a partner and becomes just another share of the food, one more mouth, easily subtracted. That was the whole plan. And the ugly, elegant genius of it was that it was almost bloodless. He didn't have to hurt me. He didn't have to do a single violent thing. He just had to take the one thing that made me matter and get it into his tanks with my own 2 hands, with me thanking him for the chance to do it. And then let the mountain and the cold and the arithmetic do the rest. Sunny told me 20 minutes was a week of fuel. I called up to him across the pad, keeping my voice level, keeping it flat, keeping it the calm, bored tool it needed to be. You've got your week in the tank right now. Why do you want the rest? Because a week isn't enough, Garrick called back. And there wasn't even any real malice in it. That was the worst part. It was just reasonable. It was a man explaining a policy. This doesn't end in a week, driver. Look around you. This doesn't end. And I am not going to have the only fuel supply on this entire mountain sitting in a truck that can drive off down the hill anytime the driver decides he's got a better idea. Fuel in my tank is fuel I control. Fuel in your truck is fuel that has an opinion. You're a logistics man. You know exactly what I mean. You'd do the same in my chair. Every single one of you would. I wouldn't, I said. And I meant it all the way down. And it did not matter one bit, because he had the gate and the rifle, and I had a live hose and 400 gallons, and a woman running toward a gap that was closing. Finish the transfer, Garrick said. And then we'll talk about getting you inside. Both of you. There's room. We'll figure it out. We'll talk about getting you inside. Not come in, you're freezing. Not there's a bunk and a bowl of soup. We'll talk about it. A negotiation to be had later, after he already held every card in the deck, after the fuel was in his tank and the truck was dead weight, and I was just a large, cold man standing outside a locked door in a storm. Sunny heard it too, and she stopped short of the gate and turned and looked back at me across the pad. And I watched her read the whole thing off Garrick's face in about 1 second flat. The way she'd read that slope above the gate. The way patrollers know a slab is going to release a full beat before it releases. The pump chugged. Diesel kept moving from my truck into their tanks, 40 gallons a minute, my only leverage in the world draining away in real time down a 2-inch hose. And I did the only thing I could think of, the only card I had left to play. And I played it slow so nobody would see me play it. I reached over to the pump's throttle and I eased it down, way down, to a bare trickle, without shutting it off entirely. So that the pump kept chugging and the hose kept twitching, and the whole thing looked from 20 feet away like a transfer still running full, while the actual fuel stayed in my truck. Buying gallons, buying minutes, buying the reserve that was the only thing keeping the truck, and me, worth anything at all. And then the mountain did what the mountain does. And it took the whole question out of both our hands. Somewhere up the slope, up near the lodge, an engine turned over, somebody up there starting Brix's abandoned machine that had followed us up. Or a second sled. I never did learn which cranked a snowmobile to life. And the sound of it rolled down the mountain, loud and bright and warm and alive in a world of quiet, dead cold. And I watched the black tree line along the ridge above the fuel farm begin to move. Not with the wind, with them. The attention of the whole mountain turning at once, every head swinging toward the loudest, newest sound, which happened to be 100 yards uphill from a fuel farm where 2 living men stood arguing over a gate with a hunting rifle held between them, and 2 more living people stood down at a pump. Garrick heard it too. His head snapped uphill. The young man with the rifle turned toward the ridge, the muzzle coming up, his whole body going tight. And in that one instant, the instant every last one of them turned toward the noise, the way all attention always turned toward the noise, I understood that the siege plan, the food math, Garrick's whole cold, elegant arithmetic, had just been overtaken and rendered meaningless by the only thing on that mountain more relentless and more patient than a man protecting his own head count. The first of them came over the ridgeline into the fuel farm's floodlights, and then another, and then the whole shoulder of the slope above us was pouring bodies, more than I could count. And Garrick stopped being an operations director and became exactly like the rest of us. Just one more warm animal in the cold, doing frantic math on how many seconds he had left. What happened in the next 4 minutes, I've had to reassemble from my own broken memory and from what Sunny told me later. Sitting at a kitchen table 100 miles and a lifetime away, because at the time, it was just noise and floodlight and cold and my own hands moving faster than any thought could keep up with. The young man with the rifle fired. Once, then again, working the bolt between, firing up the slope at the shapes coming down. And it did nothing useful at all. You cannot stop a flood by shooting individual drops out of it. And every crack of that rifle was one more bright, loud beacon in the dark, pulling more of them down toward the pad, toward us, toward the sound. Garrick let go of the gate control and ran. Ran for the lodge, up the service spur, which was the most human thing in the world, and also the exact thing that doomed his whole plan. Because with him gone, there was nobody left holding the rolling gate half closed. It sat where he'd left it, stuck on its iced track, 4 feet open. 4 feet. 4 feet was enough for a man. 4 feet was nowhere near enough for a tanker. Sunny. I killed the pump throttle all the way and slapped the camlock arms open and blew the coupling apart. No time for the ground strap. No time for the shutdown checklist. No time for anything clean or safe. Diesel spraying across the frozen gravel and steaming in the cold, and the pump screaming dry. And I had, by the red on my gauge, 380 gallons still riding in the truck. Not a full load, but not nothing. Enough. Enough to matter. And enough that mattering was the only thing keeping me alive. Sunny was at the gate hauling on it with both hands, throwing her whole weight against it. And the track was fouled solid with packed ice, and the thing would not slide, not shut, not open, jammed dead at 4 feet. And the first of the infected were 40 yards up the slope, enclosing that steady pour. And the young rifleman was backpedaling toward the lodge, firing his last rounds into a crowd that didn't care. And I made the second real choice of that night. I could go up the slope, on foot into the lodge, to the stone walls and the locking door and the 40 people, and take my chances that Garrick's food math would spare a large, useless, empty-handed man now that his fuel plan had collapsed in the snow. Or I could take the truck 380 gallons, 2 enormous floodlight bright headlights, a diesel engine loud enough and warm enough to be the whole world's entire attention, and drive it back down the mountain through a gate that was 4 feet too narrow, which meant driving through the gate, which meant taking the compound fence with me. "Get in," I screamed at her across the pad, already running for the cab. "Sunny, leave it. Get in the truck." She got in. God bless her forever. She didn't argue, didn't ask a single question. She read the whole plan off my face in the half-second it took her to look at me, and she turned and ran and hauled herself up into the passenger side and slammed the door. I fired the diesel it caught on the first turn of the key. It always caught. That beautiful, stupid, faithful old engine. Cold as it was, and I dropped it into the lowest granny gear it had. And I aimed the long nose of 40,000 pounds of tanker straight at the jammed gate and the steel fence post beside it. And I told Sunny to brace herself hard, and I let out the clutch. A loaded tanker does not accelerate. It commits. There's a long, terrible moment where nothing happens at all, where the engine loads right up, and the whole rig groans and shudders, and every bolt in it complains, and your gut tells you it isn't going to move. It's stuck. You've killed both of you. And then the mass finds its feet under it, and it goes. And the instant it's going, physics stops being your enemy and becomes your closest friend. Because nothing on God's earth, living or dead, argues with 40,000 pounds in motion. The gate and the fence post never had a prayer. We hit the gap doing maybe 15 miles an hour, and the rolling gate tore clean off its track with a shriek of steel, and the fence post sheared at the base and folded flat, and the whole chain-link fence peeled back away from us for 30 feet like a zipper coming undone. And the tanker punched out through the wreckage onto the open service spur, and every last shape on that mountain turned toward the noise of it. Which was the entire point. I wanted them on us. I wanted, in that moment, to be the single, loudest, brightest, warmest, most alive thing on the whole mountain. Because every one of them that was chasing my truck was, in that same instant, not chasing the lodge full of 40 people up the hill. I want to be careful here, because I've thought about this part longer and harder than any other. And I refused to let it come out sounding braver or cleaner than it was. I did not drive that truck through the gate to save the 40 people in the lodge. Not really. Not in my heart in that second. I did it to save Sunny and to save myself. But the effect of it, the effect of becoming the loudest, brightest thing on the mountain and driving downhill with the whole hungry, turning attention of Halverson Basin pouring after my taillights, the effect was that for the length of that entire drive down, the lodge went quiet and dark and cold, and beneath notice, invisible furniture. And 41 people who had been about 90 seconds from being overrun got instead a siege of the merely freezing, which is a siege you can at least try to live through. I keyed the CB one last time as I drove, going faster now than was safe down the switchbacks, the storm and the flood behind me, and I said, "Ostrand, I'm taking them off your mountain. Every one that'll follow a noise, I'm pulling it downhill behind me. Your tanks are 3/4 full. That's your week, and then plenty. You didn't earn 1 gallon of it." I don't know if he heard me. I don't know if he was even near a radio. The channel had already gone back to that sound, that crowd of every voice at once. The whole broken world talking over itself in the dark, and my one small voice just went down into it and was gone. We came down to the lower Avalanche gate, still standing open from where I'd cranked it up hours and a whole lifetime before. The manual override key still zipped in my chest pocket. I drove the tanker through the open arm, and I brought it to a stop on the downhill side, in that same 20 yards of neutral ground where the whole night had started. And Sunny and I sat there for a second and looked back up the mountain through the rear glass at the river of shapes still pouring down the road after the sound and light of us, strung out along the switchbacks, patient, endless coming. And then I did the last thing. The thing I still don't know, to this hour, was right. I got out, into the cold, into the wind, into the driving snow, and I went to the control pillar, and I got the crank back on the ratchet shaft, and I started to bring the gate arm back down. 12 turns per foot in reverse now, lowering, my hands 2 frozen claws locked around the handle. Sunny out of the truck too, and standing at my back watching the road, calling the distance to the nearest of them, 100 yards. Wes, 80. Keep cranking. 60 the arm, coming down foot by clacking foot as the flood came on. The first of them was maybe 40 yards up the road, close enough now that I could see it was the man in the blue polo shirt, or one just like him, snow on his bare arms, when the arm finally seated down hard into its locked position. I threw the override lock, and then I took the round key out of the box, and I closed the box and jammed a bent nail I'd fished from my pocket into the mechanism so the lid wouldn't sit right. And I turned and I threw the round key as hard and as far as I could over the downhill berm, out into the black timber and the deep snow, where no one, living or dead, would ever find it. And I couldn't have opened that gate again myself now, even if I'd wanted to, because the crank was jammed in a fouled box and the key was gone into the dark. I made sure of it. That was the whole point of it. I made sure. The gate that the resort had closed that morning to seal the sick things in, I closed it again, to seal them out of the valley below, and to seal the whole mountain, the resort, and the infected, and Garrick Ostrand, and his cold arithmetic, and the 41 warm people and all of it, up top where it belonged, behind an arm with no crank and no key. Then Sunny and I got back in the truck, and I drove us down past the Halvorsen turnoff, and past the dark dead status sign on its post. And the crossroads at 91 was by some grace I still can't account for thinner than it had been. The noise of us tearing down the mountain had pulled a good part of the valley's crowd up the resort road behind us, drawn like everything was drawn, and there was a gap in the bodies across the junction, a lane. And I threaded the tanker through it, doing 40 with my heart trying to climb out my throat, and Sunny calling the gaps like she was calling a run down a bump field. Left, hold, straight, go, and we were through. And we were on 91, and the interstate was closed, but the old frontage road that runs alongside it was not, and we took it. South, through the storm, down and down out of the high country, mile after mile, until the snow thinned and turned to sleet, and the sleet turned to a cold, hard rain, and the rain turned into a dark, wet, ordinary 2-lane highway with, eventually, so far down the mountain it felt like another planet, the lights of a town that still had its lights on. I texted Petra from the first place my phone caught a bar. Not the radio. Her phone, like she'd asked, standing in the yard all those hours and one whole world ago, with her chin set that particular way. On my way down, got a passenger with me. It's bad up there, real bad. Do not send anyone up the Halvorsen Road. Nobody, ever. She texted back in under a minute, and all it said was, "Thank God." And that told me she'd already known enough to be afraid, which told me the whole valley had known since noon, which told me the one thing I'd spent an entire day and a man's life refusing to believe had been true since before I ever pulled out of the terminal. Sunny stayed with me that night, and a lot of nights after. We don't talk much about the kid, about bricks, about the pallet of pavers and the running boards and the 2 seconds of him over the wind. She's the one who tells me, when I turn the whole thing over out loud at 2 in the morning with the ceiling going gray, that closing that gate was the right call. That a gate you cannot open is the only kind that truly holds. That the 41 people in the lodge got 3/4 of a load of good diesel out of the whole ruin of it, and a mountain gone quiet and dark behind a locked arm. And that Garrick Ostrand got exactly the fortress he schemed for, and now gets to freeze in it slow instead of getting overrun in it fast. She says all of it flat, patroller flat, the way she said the road was clear, and the road was clear. And I believe her about slopes and about snow. I want, so badly, to believe her about this, but I lie awake and I do the arithmetic anyway, The same cold arithmetic Garrick would have done, and I cannot make it come out clean no matter how I run the numbers. Because when I threw that round key over the berm into the dark timber, I didn't only seal the infected up top, I sealed the living up there too. 41 people behind a steel gate that cannot be opened, on a mountain that nobody is coming to, ever. With the diesel I gave them, and the door that Garrick locks at night, and the 3 days of food that has to somehow stretch to cover however long forever turns out to be. I turned their fortress into their tomb. Or I saved all 41 of their lives. Or I did both those things at once, with the same 12 turns of a crank. And I will never, ever know which, because the last thing I did on that mountain was make good and certain that I could never go back up it and find out. So I'll leave it with you, the way I've never once managed to leave it with myself. A man locks a gate to save himself and the one person sitting beside him. And in the doing of it, he traps 41 strangers on a dying mountain with the fuel that might keep them alive, or that might just keep them alive, long enough to run out of everything else that matters. Garrick tried to take my truck and turn me into one more mouth to subtract. And the mountain reached down and took the whole choice out of both our hands. And I drove away down the hill and threw the key into the snow. Tell me what you would have done with that key. In my gloves, ooh, with the flood 40 yards up the road and a living woman at your back. And then tell me the harder thing, the thing I really want to know. Tell me whether I turned out to be any better than Garrick in the end. When it finally came all the way down to me and mine and a gate. I'm still down here, where the towns still have their lights. The high country is dark now, all of it, from climax to the basin. And somewhere up in Halverson Basin, behind a steel arm with no crank and no key and a bent nail jammed in the box, the tanks are 3/4 full and the snow keeps coming down, and I keep the radio off.